Introduction to Sales and Operations Planning. I am Tony Zampello, and I'll be your presenter / guide today to get you through a very brief overview of what sales and operations planning is all about. As the presentation proceeds, there's a spot there where you can type in your questions. Tawana Collins from APICS Corporate, our district field associate, is listening in, and she will see those questions and compile them, and then towards the end of the presentation she'll read off those questions. So type them as you think of them, and we'll go from there. Very briefly, here's my intro. I've seen from the list that many of you listening already know who I am. Basically, I've been around for over 40 years in different environments, 30 years of them in the actual manufacturing positions and companies that many of you hold. And for the last 10 years, I've been doing consulting on my own, mostly in sales and operations planning, master scheduling, ERP implementation, those areas. I am also an educator and work at multiple colleges as an adjunct, in addition to running APICS, CSCP, and CPIM courses. That's basically who I am. I am recognized as a master instructor for APICS for both CPIM and CSCP, and I'm a lead instructor in the Principles of Operations Management program. Just as a side note, that's a really good program for companies that want to mix and match the areas they want to learn in, and then APICS will take chapters from all the 5 different modules and create one program that's just for you. So as we get on, what we're going to be talking about today are the basic definition of S&OP, a process overview, some of the attributes and objectives, some of the challenges, and there are many, the foundational components, and the benefits of S&OP. One thing to remember right off the top is that S&OP is a process. It is not software that you buy, although there are packages out there that say here is an S&OP package. They can be very helpful to you, but you don't need them to run S&OP. Basically, if we looked at the formal definition, and I'm not going to read every word to you right on the slide because I know you guys can do that just as well, if not better. But S&OP basically is a process that helps develop the tactical plans that will support the business strategy that has been put in place, which is geared towards achieving a competitive advantage by integrating our customer-focused marketing plans with our supply plan. So in rough terms, it basically says a company decides how they're going to make their money and how they're going to then supply the service or product that the customer is looking for, that is the existence or the reason of existence for this particular company. It's the first time we start to actually turn a lot of thoughts and words into some numbers that we can start to deal with to run our company. It is all about balancing. On one side, we have demand. We have demand that we forecast, and we have actual orders that we get from our customers. If a company can survive with a horizon of only seeing the actual orders on hand, there's no reason to do any forecasting. There are few, if any, companies like that that exist. So in addition to having our hands on those actual orders, we need to make sure that we have some kind of forecasting in place. And yes, we all know forecasts are always wrong. So when we deal with our forecasts, we're always trying to do the best we can, and then understanding the history of our forecast and how it comes out versus actual. Demand, in effect, is infinite. There can be as much demand out there as you can create or as the market can create. On the other side of the process is supply. And we have supply orders, manufacturing work orders and purchase orders, and we have resources and capacity to run those orders through. If that supply, the capacity that we have and the orders that we have are not sufficient to balance demand the way the company has defined it, then we will supplement that supply with inventory. Inventory, yes, it's a bad word in most companies, but if it's a tool that we use, if used properly, it can do wonders to help your company. From an expense point of view, you always want to keep inventory at the lowest level in your bill of material, which is the raw material that you buy. As soon as you start to process that, you are adding labor and overhead, and at some point you are making it into your finished good, and then in addition to the labor, overhead, and materials, you are now carrying that inventory at that high price or high cost until you are able to sell it. So it's a tool, but it's a very expensive tool. Balancing does not have to be straight across like it looks here on the slide. A company may decide that they want to have more supply available than they have demand for. This would be an example of a make-to-stock company that says, I want to have the product done and ready to go so that when those orders come in, we're ready for them. On the other hand, you may have a company that says, gee, I really don't know exactly what the customer is going to order, so I'm going to have the demand heavier than the supply, which means in effect that we're going to tell our customers there's a lead time and the price they pay is the lead time, but what they get for it is some choice in the variety of the product that they want. Or we can try and match it straight across and balance all of it together. As we look at the entire picture, we have that business plan that we mentioned right at the beginning, way at the top. As you read this particular slide from top to bottom, you're going to go from looking way out on the horizon. The business plan is going out there years from now, and then you're going to go all the way to the bottom where you're scheduling your plant and your supplier, and you're looking at what's happening right now, what's happening this week, this shift, what are we doing this month. Then from a detail point of view, the business plan, especially because you're looking so far out in the future, is not very detailed at all. As we get it into S&OP, you come up with more details. We start to break it into families, and then as you go down the line, by the time we get down to the plant, we're looking at huge amounts of detail. So what we're always keeping in mind is matching the amount of detail that we have to deal with versus the horizon. The longer the horizon, the less detail that you can afford to deal with and still come up with something that's worthwhile. So in general, you have a business plan or strategy going out a few years, and then you feed that into sales and operations planning as a process. Now, one of the things you'll see throughout this presentation is that we're going to give you the generic, in effect, most common practices that are out there. This is not the only way to run S&OP. There are variations, and you will make those variations when you start to fit it into your company culture, into the resources your company has, especially from an information point of view. But this is how, in general, it works, and it's an excellent model to begin the process and then make your changes from there. The processes that we have out there, we have demand management. All right, that begins, we have a forecast. At the S&OP level, that forecast is looking at the market itself, not so much the customers, because it's so far out into the future. S&OP rule of thumb is anywhere from 12 to 18 months into the future. And yeah, we have an idea who the customers are going to be because we have a lot of them now, but we're continually churning our customers, getting new ones, shedding old ones. So we're looking at what's the market going to do, and we look for those factors that will influence the markets that we work with. So therefore, we have at the S&OP level a product or brand plan that tells us what we do, a marketing plan that says how we're going to get it out there, and then the sales plan that says this is what we're going to turn it into as far as orders. On the supply side, we get a little more detailed, where we have to now break it down into, well, we have to come out with some kind of production that makes sense, because we're going to feed that into master scheduling and then further into MRP. At that level, we are going to have a resource profile set up for the different families that we arrange at S&OP, and they are going to be the resources that we need a lot of time to consider before we actually go and pull the trigger and say, let's go get them. Those resources could be expensive machinery, but it can be more than that. In your company, you may be dealing with a raw material that is in short supply, and you need to know a year from now what kind of supply you're going to need, so that your sourcing and purchasing people can actually go out there and make some good contracts and some good deals. So you want to know roughly how much of that you would need. You might also be in an industry or have a facility that takes your product through the process, and at some point the product has to stop and then sit for 30 days to cure or to process on its own, and then be picked up 30 days later to see, did you get what you tried to get? You'll see that in the drug industry, especially when you're making biologicals. So that means you need space on the floor. Maybe your product is heavy into refrigeration. You'll need X amount of refrigeration space. So you need to know ahead of time, if that's critical to you, how much space will we need. When we compare the resources we have versus the ones we need, we are always looking at it in two directions. Naturally, we're looking to see where we might not have enough of the resources, and then considering the alternatives to get more. But this also gives us an idea into the future of when we might start to have an excess of some of these resources, and gives us a chance to look at the alternatives there. Another area that we will get out of S&OP is a picture of our inventory. And inventory is not really planned, it happens. And it happens because it's the difference between demand and supply. What we do in S&OP is we come up with a demand plan, then we come up with a production plan that we have balanced out and validated by our resources, and that calculates an inventory. We will then look at that inventory to see if it fits the parameters that we've been given by our company so that we can go forward. If it does not meet those parameters, we have to go back, and basically the only thing we can change is the production plan. It's very rare that you would go back and say, oh, well, never mind, we'll change the sales plan because that is just an estimate anyway. That sales plan is the best idea with the best knowledge that we have of what we're going to do. So inventory is just an adjustment of how we're going to produce, whether earlier or later. And then again, depending on your industry, you may have to have a good look at distribution because you're distributing your product around the world through a complex system of many regional, national distribution locations, and you want to take a good look at those critical ones at that S&OP process step. As we start to look at the attributes, it is connecting that business plan, which is strategic, to the tactical plan, which is master scheduling. So in effect, S&OP is a tactical kind of plan. It balances supply and demand at the family level. You only need a few of these families. 12 to maybe 18 families should be plenty for a division. There are companies that also work with subfamilies these days because they can get the IT power they need to run through lots of numbers. But basically, we're looking at groups of products, and typically those families are going to be based on the marketing identification, not the manufacturing. That is something we have learned over the years, that we should build the family more towards what marketing views, because we then use our resource planning to tie those families together from a production point of view. As we plan, we're going to plan at the volume level as opposed at the individual end product mix, because we just want to see where we're going from a rate base. Where can we fit that? So each family is going to have its production plan by volume, and then again it will be tested against the resources that we have available in those particular periods. S&OP is done on a monthly basis, and it's in monthly buckets for each family. It will give us a better understanding of the market opportunities. If we have some major customers, and we all do, we will look for them to help us with the forecast. If you are making a part that goes into your customer's bill of material, into their product, the best thing you can do is get in close, tight with that customer and find ways to get them to trust you and let you right into their system to see MRP for your part. You no longer have to forecast that part for that customer. You now have what they are thinking of doing. So while MRP sounds very scientific, when it gets far enough out, it's really just based on a forecast. But it's their forecast, not yours. So who has a better chance of coming out at least with a better number, knowing that, of course, that neither one of us will come out with an exact number. But it will help us understand the opportunities that are out there and be able to match them against the capabilities we have in a company. S&OP must involve every major department in the company. And you'll see there we mark sales, marketing, manufacturing, logistics, finance, and then of course we cover ourselves by saying, and other departments. Some of those other departments that you might not notice when you just look at those few are departments like human resources. So I know some of you are scratching your heads and saying, why would human resources worry about something we're going to do 12 to 18 months from now? Well, if you're thinking of doubling capacity, the longer they have to think about what approaches can we take to double capacity from an HR or labor point of view, the more options they can come up with that are better for you. And if we look at the negative side, if you're starting to think that, gee, a year from now we may not need the facilities we have now and start consolidating them, the sooner HR knows, the better again that they can plan. The last thing HR wants and that you want is to have to walk into HR on Friday and say, oh, by the way, next week we only need half as many people as we have now. That gives them no notice whatsoever, and it really limits their options. Included in manufacturing is where you see your supply chain and your materials people and your purchasing and sourcing people and your maintenance people. Very often maintenance sure would like to know when they can go in and tear apart that big machine and do a major overhaul. Because every time they ask us on a day-to-day basis, we tell them, not now, not now, we've got lots of orders. And then when we say, okay, you can have the machine, they look at us with 4 eyes and say, but I'm not ready. I don't have the right personnel. I don't have the parts lined up. So the more they're included in meetings like this, the better picture they'll have going forward. S&OP is demand and strategy driven. That goes back to what I said a few minutes ago, where we said you do that demand plan first, then the production plan, which is validated by resources, and then you find out if the inventory fits the plans of the company. And if it doesn't, you go back and change your production plan, not your demand plan. The objectives that we have out there is that S&OP is out there to support the business plan. So while the business plan may be one big grand number, like we need to do $1 billion, S&OP is going to break that into the families and into the months that make up that $1 billion. It's going to make sure that those strategic plans are realistic before we turn them loose into the master scheduling world. If we are all of a sudden saying that we are going to double sales within 6 months, we need to know, and S&OP is certainly going to help us, do we have the resources or can we get them quick enough to be able to do that? Otherwise, that may not be realistic, and we have to look back at the makers of the strategic plan and talk about why that can't be done. So it is possible that you may go back up the ladder and say, we cannot find a way to do it based on what we know now. When we have those plans out there, and by reviewing them each month, we are going to be making changes. You want to review all the months every month, but you're not necessarily going to change each one. But when there are changes to make, this gives you the chance to talk about them with all the right players in the right place at the right time. It does wonders to get everybody tied in together. We will manage our finished good inventory if we're make to stock. We will manage order backlog if we're make to order. It will manage both if we are an assemble to order, also known as finish to order or postponement. It's going to help us build the performance measures we need to identify how we're doing. Our plan isn't always necessarily right and production is wrong or sales are wrong. Sometimes it's our plan and the assumptions that we made. As we build that sales plan and as we build that production plan, we must have not just numbers, but a list of all the assumptions that we made. Are we going to make assumptions based on the last 6 months' history? Are we going to make assumptions on we're finally going to get that customer that we've been chasing for 2 years? We need to keep track of those, so then when we compare our actual versus our plan, we can find out where the differences came from. It will enable our companies to be focused, aligned, and engaged. Those are 3 key words that very easily get lost in the fray of trying to get orders out every day. So we want everybody focused, and we want them focused on the same plan, which is alignment. When we've looked at companies, and this was back from 2011, a survey, looking at companies and asking, some various questions, here's where some of the statistics came out to be. Back then, companies that have overcome the challenges and are seeing significant results said 46%. Now, seeing significant results does not mean they're finished, but it means they're happy with what they're doing, it's helping them run their business, and they're continuously improving. One of the tenets of S&OP is you never stop improving the process. You're constantly looking for ways to make it better. 36% of the companies say, gee, we're stuck here, or we're going but nowhere near at the rate we wanted to. So that's a big chunk of companies that have said, this is important, but we thought we'd be going a lot faster than this. We're stuck on a problem, we can't get past it. 8% had a smooth implementation and followed best practices. 8% said, well, we better start again and learn from the mistakes we made. But only a very, very few said they had no plans. So companies are seeing the value in putting in a formal plan. Every company out there now already does S&OP. They may not have a formal way of doing it. They may not call it S&OP, but every company out there is trying to figure out what their sales are, what their production is, what their inventory is, and they're trying to work together to make it happen. Formal S&OP, or otherwise known too as executive S&OP, are trying to put it all together so that everyone is working to one company game plan. Some of the challenges that companies run into, this came from that same survey. Biggest ones, lack of strategic coordination just among the departments. Some departments, if they're not aligned properly, are going to try and do the best they can in the discipline they're in. As in, hey, I'm in inventory control and I am going to do the best job of controlling the inventory we have. And it doesn't matter to me if we have a little bit or a lot, I'm going to be the best there is at it. That may not work when you're trying to work hard to manage that inventory level. Every department needs to be tied in to the rest of them. We have to coordinate, which leads right into the insufficient interaction. S&OP will get you that formal interaction on a month-to-month basis. Lack of vision, lack of commitment from the top, those are major challenges that you have to attack right at the beginning. You have to know where you stand at any point in time, and it has to be geared from the top of the organization down. The foundations we have in S&OP, I've already mentioned, continuous improvement is key. Change management is big as you start to formalize, because you're going to ask people to do things they haven't done before. You're going to ask people to stop doing some of the things they've been doing and trust someone else. So we need the pillars that you see here to make all that happen, we need to know what that planning horizon is. We need that leadership and accountability. Heavy-duty analytics are going to be necessary because now we're going to dig into the forecast. We're going to dig into lots of data, and we need to turn it into information. Many of the analytics we need are going to be directed by getting data that's outside of our company, things that we don't keep track of, that we're going to go out and ask other companies who do it for a living to see what do they do to make this work. Grids and graphs are great. They will show you in pictures what you've been trying to do. Instead of seeing this big sheet with a pile of numbers on it, by showing a grid and a graph, it will do wonders at helping that discussion. When we talked about a tiered planning horizon, you have the strategic, the tactical, the operational. Strategic is that business plan that goes way out into the future, whereas the medium is where we're getting into tactical, so that's where S&OP is. And then that will feed our short range or operational plans. The benefits there, we're going to link to that strategic corporate goal. One of the objectives of the president of the company that's running that final S&OP meeting is to keep an eye on, well, what are we trying to do strategically to make sure that S&OP output is supporting that. We need to build that coordination, and we have to make everything that we do out there easy to build a consensus so that when we have conflict, which will naturally arise between goals, we understand what the company's stance is on how to resolve those issues. It gives top management the ability to step away from the day-to-day and not get in the fray of, oh my God, what are we going to ship this week? We got to get this out the door. At S&OP, you should never be talking about what you're shipping this week, and you should never be talking about what's on your master schedule, which could be a 2-month or 3-month horizon. Those are givens that are fed in, so you have the continuity of information, but those are the near term, the operational parts that you're dealing with on a weekly and daily basis, as opposed to S&OP that takes over in month 3 or 4 and then goes out into that longer horizon. When you look at some of the sub-processes, you can see many of them here. You've got your corporate plan, that's your strategy, and then you've got the demand side and the supply side. The key here, as you see with S&OP at the bottom, is how do we keep those things together? How do we make these tie and make sure that the consensus is there to work on them, and then that they support each other. Supply supports demand, demand supports supply, and we have a single company game plan that we are working to. The third area is the leadership accountability, and that's that executive team. This is the top person in the company. Now, if you have a big company with many divisions, you may do S&OP at each division or each factory and then consolidate it later on in the process to one big number depending on how far it needs to go up. But at your particular division, this is your chief executive there. Some companies call her the president, some call him the CEO. It all depends on what works in your company, but it's that key person and the members of their team. And that's where you get to cover all the departments, because there's somebody on the executive team that has responsibility for every department that's out there. So we're trying to get that executive team to make those decisions on the critical issues, or to help us change some of the policies and procedures we had in place because they no longer fit where we are going as a company. An executive sponsor is the person that's setting the expectations for us for top management. That sponsor is helping us authorize the necessary resources, and whenever we run into obstacles trying to get the S&OP process done, this is the key person that's going to clear the way for us. The process owner leads the monthly planning process. Now, the owner of the entire process is the person that runs that division. The process owner may be an S&OP facilitator. It could be an S&OP manager or director that keeps everything in line at each of the different meetings that have to happen on specific work days during the month. So that owner is down there making sure everything happens for that top person. You have to be very careful, though, that everyone understands that this meeting is called for and run by the top person in the company, even though this process owner may be the one providing the agenda and making sure everyone is staying on top of each of their functions. The demand planning team, very simply, is taking care of what are we doing with demand. We're looking at the sales forecast. Where are the markets that we need to get into? Do we have to make changes in prices and promotions? How do we do all those things? The supply side is setting the production rate that will support that demand plan. That's going to be the one that says we have or need more resources. That is going to be the area that says, gee, we have too many resources. Let's figure out what to do with the excess. And by going it month by month and having a rolling period so that you're always seeing out the same amount of time, and each month the future keeps coming closer, but you're adding one at the end, gives you a chance to validate that, yeah, what I've been seeing is really going to happen, and when it's time to pull the trigger, you've had a lot of time to think about it and make the decisions that you need to. And then the pre-S&OP team, those are the people that are below that executive team that are working all month long to put together all the data that's needed, trying to put together all the plans that are needed so that when you have that executive S&OP meeting at the end of the month, you've already presented to the executives, here's where we want to go. Here's, based on the rules you gave us, what we can do. As an example, you may have 12 families of products, and you have lots of different rules for how much production can go up or down from one month to the next. You have rules on how much inventory can be there. You may have a min and a max as far as a value in dollars. These teams go through family by family. And what you may have with 12 product families, they may get through 9 of those product families with no problems whatsoever. They're able to move things around, make them work so that both the sales, demand side, and the supply side are gelling just like they're supposed to, and they're able to resolve the conflicts within the basic policies that exist. Then there's going to be 2 families that they say, gee, we're going to have to break the rules for a period of time and then go back to them, and here's a couple of alternatives that we can present. So they are going to get those ready for the S&OP meeting. So you're going to say families 1 through 9, here are the ones we want the executives to look at and say, okay, that looks good, makes sense, go for it. Then there's these 2, and they're going to talk about them a little bit deeper. They're going to look at the alternatives, and the executives are going to say, okay, looks like your alternative A here works and B works over here. Good job, let's go. But then there's that 12th family. And the pre-S&OP team has said, no matter how hard we try, we just can't make this one work with the rules we're given and with the knowledge that we have. That's the family you want to spend the most time on at that final S&OP executive meeting, where you've got the right people in the room at the right time. Should we change a rule? Do we need to make a major purchase of a new facility or a raw material? Do we need to finally make a decision to close one? And again, you will always see this coming with the data that you have out there, because you've been looking far enough into the future, and it's not all of a sudden a surprise and time to make a decision. So leadership is answering the question, who are the owners of the process? Because without this process, we are just going to flounder. Analytics is very important. We need to get through what data is out there, and there's tons of data out there these days, so we need to turn that into the information we need. So there's a lot of work that has to be done there. You need some good tools, and you need some very good detail-oriented people to be on your teams to make that happen. And then, because it's a process, just like any other process, we want to make sure that we are measuring what needs to be measured. As with all measurements, we don't measure something just because we can. I can measure how tall I am, but it doesn't do me any good because I'm way past the stage where I'm going to be getting any bigger and any taller. Yeah, I might get bigger, but I'm not going to get any taller. So it doesn't do me any good to measure. On the other hand, I could measure my weight, and if that's something that's important to me and I can do something about it and set a target, then it's a worthwhile measurement. If I'm not going to do anything about it, just because I can measure it doesn't mean I should. So you got to really key in on what are the right measurements for us, for our company, and then make sure they are things that the people being measured in that process can control. And then if they know they can control it, they know what levers to pull to make it different, they can compare to the target and get better or worse as the months go by. Here's what a sample grid might look like, and this would be in a make-to-stock environment. At the top, it's all about the sales, and you'll see we have a number of past periods because we want to get an idea of how have we been doing forecast versus actual. The current period is the month that we're in, and then everything else is a major forecast after that. As an example, in this particular one we're looking at, maybe our master schedule goes out 2 months, this month and next month. So May and June would come right from the master schedule, and then July and afterwards would come from the S&OP process. Now, because it doesn't fit, it would be hard for you to see. These usually go out current period plus another 17 months is a general rule of thumb. That's where that total of 18 comes from. So it's the 18 out into the future, and the first couple of those are coming straight from the master schedule. You have one of these for every family that you have. That's why you need to limit the number of families and keep them down to a reasonable size. There's your production plan, and then there is the calculation of the finished goods inventory. And all that is taking the actual beginning inventory and then subtracting the sales and adding the production, and you will come up with a projected available finished goods inventory. Then you can compare that to your plans and find out if that production plan is right. And it's definitely an iterative process where you're never going to come out with that first production plan and it's going to work just right. You're going to have to go back and forth because it may work for one rule but violate another one, so this would help you move forward. Graphs are always good. One thing to look for when you do a graph is try to make the graph so that if you're standing back looking at it, when the lines move up and to the right, that's a good thing, because that's pretty much how we're trained to look at things. So don't keep track of something on a negative point of view, meaning the higher it goes, the worse it is. That's going to be harder to read. You have to then really concentrate on the graph. Try and make them as much as a picture, because we all know that the picture at least gives us a start to say what's happening here. And let's not forget, and apologies to any executives that might be listening, but we want to keep the executives' attention, so we have to show them pictures sometimes. It can't just be all words and numbers. Everything we do in S&OP is going to be constantly looking at the way we do things and changing them. So it's been said that 60% of it is change management, 30% is process development, and the final 10% is technology. So people are by far the most important tool you have to run your company. So we have to look very hard and understand change management. We have to make sure that we understand the drivers and that we do what needs to be done to move forward. Training employees, educating employees. What you're getting today is education, training you on specific tools. Maybe we need to buy new tools or a more vibrant Excel version. Whatever we have to do is going to help us move forward with change. Continuous improvement. I'm sure you've heard about this one over and over again. Well, it applies just as much in the S&OP world. We constantly want to make things better than they were and never settle that we are at the best we can be. We need to make sure the teams see things coming, they have ideas, that those ideas are heard, and encourage our employees to take that ownership and reinforce the teamwork that we need to keep it moving. Some of the benefits: it's going to get an operational plan that's consistent with the business plan. We're going to get cross-functional planning. That's a huge benefit in S&OP, where different departments are going to work together. And we are going to look at resources in plenty of time to make sure that we have the time to consider all the alternatives and don't get stuck in a corner having to make a quick decision and not being able to spend the time making the best decision. As we get into some of the additional resources that are out there for you, and we'll take questions in just a few seconds, if you go to the apics.org website, you're going to see the S&OP folios out there. There are principals seminars. APICS now offers an S&OP certificate. What you just listened to earned you 1 credit hour towards that certificate. In that certificate, you need to go to a 1-day workshop to gain the first 7 hours, and then the last 5 hours can be accomplished by going to conferences like you see here, the Best of the Best, or the APICS 2014 conference in New Orleans or Dubai, where we'll be doing these things also. Or you can find many other places where webinars will get you the credit that you need. So for participating today, you get that 1 credit. And those of you that are still working on your certifications as far as maintenance goes, you've earned a point towards CPIM and a point towards CSCP for your certification maintenance. So do keep track of that, and don't forget there's a valuable point that you've gained for your maintenance that happens every 5 years. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Tawana to see what, if any, questions we have at this point in the process. Tawana?
Thank you, Tony. And at this time, we would like to remind everyone to use the questions queue to submit your questions. Tony, we do have a few questions.
Okay.
The first one is, it says that S&OP is tactical, but it is also called strategic. Which is it?
That's an excellent question. It's on the verge of being part of both. It has to be strategic from the point of view that it's going to balance with the business plan, and it has to take into account where the company wants to go over the long term, but it's got to be tactical to turn that plan into something we can use. So it's a translator. So anytime you have a translator, there's something that's in between that's going to satisfy both sides of the coin.
Thank you. Next question. Does S&OP always have to be done at the family level?
Always is a funny word, and anybody out there who's still taking APICS exams knows that if one of the answers has always, you try to avoid that answer like the plague. So the answer very strictly is no, it does not always have to be at the family level. More times than not, that is the best way to go, but you may have a situation where it can be done at a more detailed level. In fact, another consultant and I are working with a company that is doing S&OP, and we are doing it below that because it makes more sense for the company. We tried to break it into families, and that just was not giving us the type of information and didn't let us go out on the market to find out what we needed. So we are actually at a more detailed level. But it is rare that when it is not done at the family level.
Next question. Why is it called SINOP sometimes?
Those are the companies that want to put an emphasis on inventory. That I stands for inventory, sales, inventory, and operations planning. It's really a semantics kind of thing. I always argue that there is no I in S&OP. And what I mean is, one of the things I tried to explain during the presentation is that inventory is just a calculation. Now, yes, we want to keep it under control, so it's not something we just want to walk away from, but we need to do the calculation with the sales plan we have and the production plan that we have, and then look at the way the inventory comes out, and then decide, oh, if that does not fit our policy, we have to go back and change production. There's very little else we can do at that point. So we can't just change an inventory number. We have to go back and change production. So that's what the I stands for. From a personal level, I really don't like seeing it there because it's a calculation as opposed to an actual plan in the process.
Next question. How long should it take from an initial meeting to the final meeting in a given month in terms of days?
That's a very good question, and I'm going to address it as if you've finally gotten into a nice good swing. You're still not at the beginning of the process, but once you get things moving, if we're going to go through the generic 5-step process, which you didn't get to see today, but step 1 was gathering data. that should come out on day one, right out of the system, once you decide what to do. Then your next step is massaging and playing with the demand data, looking at it, reviewing it, getting a picture of the new month that you're adding, and that is maybe you have to complete that by work day 4 or 5. The next step is the supply side, looking at that new sales plan, and they may have to do some massaging again, looking at that. So let's put them out at day 9 that they have to complete the supply side. So then we've got a new demand plan, a new supply plan, and what we want to do on day 11 is to get everybody together who put those plans together, put them in one room, and hash out the final sales and operations plan, production plan that they want to have going forward. So they're doing that on day 11, and depending on how intense it gets, that could be day 11 and 12. You want to leave a couple days to get the information out there, and then by day 15, day 19 at the latest, but more like work day 15 in the month, is when you want to have your executive S&OP every month. And one of the keys to making S&OP successful is to set up the plan in advance by workday that says, here it is. So everybody knows on the 15th workday of the month, executive S&OP is going to happen, and they can schedule everything else around that, even to the point of, I don't make a customer visit that day unless I have a really, really big problem. But I don't schedule a customer visit for that day because I know I have that meeting. I don't schedule some other meetings for that day because I know about it. So if you set your calendar well in advance and you make everyone understand this is the president calling the meeting, then it'll flow a whole lot easier for your company.
Tony, I believe we have time for one more question.
Okay.
And the question is, how is IBP different than S&OP?
IBP, which is generally referred to as an integrated business plan, tends to be different from sales and operations planning because it starts to bring in what we really do in executive sales and operations planning, which is where S&OP is supposed to go. So a bit of it is just a semantics kind of thing, because executive S&OP says we're going to take all this stuff, we're going to make sure the financials are all tied into it, and we're going to make sure it is about the whole company and not just certain areas. So executive S&OP, which is really what we're talking about in the end, and IBP, to me, are pretty much the same animal. The key there is making sure that you're tying in all the financials. And if you think about it for a minute, even when you're just starting S&OP, you've got some very basic financials already available to you. You have a sales plan by month, so you can easily turn that into dollars, and you want to because you need to balance to the strategic plan. And then when you see that, you can say, well, here's the revenue by month. And the financial department can take that and say, all right, if that's when we sell it, we usually get paid 30 days later, so they offset everything by a month, and they say, ooh, that's when cash is coming in. They look at the production plan, and they say, aha, there's where we have to spend X amount of money based on that rate of production for our labor and overhead, and we need to bring in the raw materials a month ahead of time. So we're going to spend money the previous month. And then, ooh, look at the inventory. Now we can figure out an inventory carrying cost and what have you. So you have a very basic income statement when you do that. You have part of your balance sheet when you do that. So you've already got everything in the works to develop the financials you need, And that is very often what companies mean when they say, okay, let's take it to the next level and put in an integrated business process or business plan.
Thank you, Tony. No further questions at this time. Do you have any final comments?
I would like to let everyone know that in the next few days, early next week, we will post this particular presentation as and with the recording to it to the APICSmonadnock.org website, so that it will be available to anyone that needs to go there, and you can contact us through that website and with any other questions that you think of that may not have been answered, and feel free to send those in. And I do thank everyone for taking the time out today, because I know at least here in Rhode Island it's a glorious day, and I'm on my way back outside. So I hope you guys get some time out there in the sun too. Hope you all have a great weekend.